With our mouth in a good place, let's move upward into the nose. And I'll hit Alt-H in sculpt mode to bring back the rest of our sculpture. And beginning with this very basic triangular shape, I'm going to cut two essential forms to begin shaping the anatomy. And the first one is going to be continuing our nasolabial fold to take a right turn, hook around, and start towards the tip of the nose. So with my Draw Sharp brush, I'm going to hold Control and start making that hook down. Again, the Draw Sharp does not generate new topology. I've got dynamic topology enabled. So let's use the crease brush to update that geometry. And then I'll go back to Draw Sharp. Kind of an annoying thing. Hopefully Draw Sharp will affect the geometry one day soon. But I'm going to start that hook and then smooth it out so that the depth of the crease tapers off towards the tip of the nose. All right, so this starts to outline a nostril structure, which also tells me that my nasolabial fold entered into the nasal region a little too high. Either that or the base of the nose is too low, or maybe both. So let's first bring up the base of the nose, because I've always thought since the beginning that the nose is a little bit long, so we definitely have room to go upwards. And if I pull that bottom corner up, what's also nice about this is that the base of the nose is no longer flat across, but it has more of a diagonal curvature to it. And this also shrinks the height of the nostril, but I'll still pull down the nasolabial fold connection a little bit as well. All right, that's looking a little more natural. Although if I look from the side, Control-3, look how messed up our nostril is from this angle. We need to bring back the crease towards the face. There we go. Now we will take the time to form these much more smoothly, but for now we're just trying to make it look not horrible. Again, we're starting out with basic, two basic essential shapes of the nose, and then we'll polish all of the anatomy. But that was just such a bad offender at this point. So that looks a little bit better. There's still a dip right here. So let's take our clay strips, hold Control, and kind of chunk some of this out. Smooth it. There we go. Not quite so offensive now. And the second key structure I want to implement is the nostril, how it goes up into the nose. So with the inflate brush, I'm going to begin holding Control. Make sure first that I'm using the subdivide collapse refine method. Subdivide edges does not work well with inflate, at least not drastic inflate strokes like we're going to make. Let's increase the strength all the way up to 1, hold Control, and I'm going to start pushing up these capsule shapes. All right, we're not going for a perfect circle, but it's elongated in between the tip of the nose and the corner of the nostril. All right, so kind of an angled capsule shape, and we're just going to push it straight up into the nose. We're going to make a lot of firm strokes here so that we push it up significantly. We can switch to wireframe by holding Z and moving our mouse to the left, and you can see that they're poking upward along the column direction of the nose, right? So we don't want them too far to the left or too far to the right, but as straight up into the nostril as we can manage. And in addition to pushing straight up, I'll also push a little bit outward as well. So let's just navigate around the whole nostril opening and push it out a little bit. The result, if we go to wireframe, should be just like this. So let me turn my overlays on. And instead of a straight up and down structure, I want it to kind of come out like this. Because I want it to leave a rim right along the nostril opening. Okay, so we're off to a pretty good start. Turn off our overlays once again. And then just smooth out the shape. There's a little bit of a bump here. So move it back with the grab brush. Smooth out the nostril opening. And yeah, this is a good start. Now those are the two key features. And often I see a lot of new sculptors leave it at this. But this is a pretty far cry from realistic anatomy, especially this concentric loop around the nostril. So at this point, let's take a look at our anatomical model. to better understand nasal anatomy. Now, you'll notice from the last time you saw this that we have nasal cartilage involved. The first version of this asset did not include nasal anatomy, so let's just turn off everything but the skeletal layer so we can see the brand new, to me, nasal cartilage. Specifically, the major alar cartilage here plays a major effect on what the opening of the nostril looks like. So if I bring back the skin layer, you'll notice that unlike our current sculpture, which is a concentric loop like this, that's not what's actually happening in nasal anatomy. We actually have more of a spiral starting out from the columella, circling around, and then going inside. And that going inside, this shape right here, is very important for looking realistic, but was also something that was confusing to me for a long time. And the reason for that spiral is due to the major alar cartilage, because it's separated into two lobes, so to speak. The lateral crus is the upper part, and then the medial crus is down here at the bottom. And this medial crus actually splits apart because the septal cartilage in the middle kind of splits it. So instead of coming straight down like this, it actually pokes out this direction. And that poking out is what causes that shape at the skin level. So that's the next thing I want to address in the sculpture, creating this spiral nostril opening. And the first step of that will be to flatten out this bottom here with a clay strips brush, and I'm going to hold Control and cut this in. All right, so I'm essentially flattening this shape out. All right, and from here, we'll keep the clay strips brush, and we've already got the shape started from the columella circling around, but I want to bring it out right on the inside of the nostril. And then make it connect to the exterior of the rim. All right, so I'm going to build the structure up first, and then we'll move it around for more precise proportioning. But that structure is very important. Let's smooth it out. It's also important to keep an indentation here between the columella and the medial crus of the cartilage. There we go. So from here, I'll use the grab brush to kind of bring this shape out. And this is a feature that's either more or less pronounced on the person, but it should be involved in the structure to some degree. Let's smooth this out a bit. And then smooth into the nostril. There we go. That's a good start. Now, the actual corner of the nostril needs to be pulled back significantly. And it's probably time to better form the backside crease. So I'll do that with my Draw Sharp brush, hold Control, cut this in. This is another example of where I want to cut it in definitively, and I can always smooth it back out as much as I need. Now, I'm not going to continue this crease into the columella. I'm going to cut it off towards the bottom of the nostril. Remember, we flattened that out, and I want to maintain that. Let's use the pinch. Oh, I'm not using the right refine method, so let's switch to subdivide edges. Let's try pinching that again. And once I have it defined, I can hold Shift and start smoothing things out. Also, the inflate brush here is going to be nice to really tighten those creases. And so I can tighten it a lot and then smooth it out after the fact. I actually love this technique if you haven't picked up on that already. But I love inflating creases and then smoothing them out. It's really the only way I can consistently form a nice tight crease. So along those lines, let's continue this shape into the nasolabial fold. We've kind of lost the definition along the way, which is very common in this corner of the nose where the nostril connects to the cheek. But you also want this to be very smooth. So this little indentation right here really ruins the shape. So I want to make sure that that's smooth from the side angle. Nice swooping curve. Also from the front. All right, so we flattened out. That's not what we want. We want it to be rounded. All right, and all of these little lumps in the nostril especially hinder the final result. So I want to take a moment to just smooth this stuff out. Try and get rid of as many lumps as possible. It's going to be very difficult to get rid of all of them with dynamic topology. That just comes with this particular method, but we can get pretty close. And on some people, this crease is really, really sharp, but on other people, the alar crease is smoothed out a bit. I'm just going to smooth it slightly. All right, make sure it has a nice, consistent curve all the way around like this. And that's looking much better. One of the more difficult things to maintain in the nostril is a really smooth rim. It's very easy with dynamic topology for it to result in a bumpiness. But approaching it with an inflate brush, keeping the rim a proper thickness. There we go. That's looking better. Okay. So we've refined the nostril pretty well, and which I think is the hardest part of the nose. And now we can continue upwards into easier structures to form. Let's jump back to our anatomical model. Let's hide the skin. And the way I like to approach this is kind of memorizing the cartilage structure. And we're going to be drawing indentations that reflect where the cartilages meet. So we're talking about this edge here at the major alar, also where that one connects with the lateral septal, and then also the front of the major alar between the two. And even though that's only two contours, I think of 1, 2, and 3. And then actually there is a fourth that I don't see defined quite so well in the muscle or cartilage structure, but right here, I find that this is a pretty important indentation to make as well, kind of running along the middle of the lateral septal cartilage. So let's see what that looks like in practice. I'm going to switch to my draw sharp brush. And the first one, let's just smooth this out, is going to be connecting the nasolabial fold and alar creases, holding control and lightly curving it back around toward the nostril. Okay? So some people have it defined a lot. Other people just have it loosely defined. But that kind of segments off the nostril from the tip of the nose and the bridge of the nose. Let's just inflate this. It's looking a little bit flat. Also doesn't help that the upper ridge of the nostril is so flat. There we go. But now that we've got that segmented off, I like to use the inflate brush to kind of plump up the tip of the nose into something of a ball shape. Again, some people have this more of a ball, some people have less of a ball, but for a generic nose, I'm going to go somewhere in the middle, just give it a light ball shape. And then from here, I can start to make that crease with the draw sharp brush, indentation in between the lateral septal cartilage and the major alar cartilage. Right, so we're going to make that a diagonal from left to right where we meet in the middle, and then we'll cut down the middle. Now this is an optional step, but I think for understanding the anatomy it helps. But again, this is where the two halves of the major alar cartilage meet. And sometimes on people's noses you can get a little crease in the middle. Some people don't have hardly any indication of this. It's just nice and round, especially older people sometimes. But by drawing the anatomy very specifically, we can always tone down these creases if we want to go from a very defined nasal structure to less defined. And people have any variety of definition. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let's take a look at our profile now, which this matte cap doesn't particularly work well with the default Blender theme, because as we approach the edges of our sculpture, it starts to blend in with the background gray. So just temporarily, I'm going to switch over to this Pearl matte cap. So that way we get a very defined profile visualization. And this is where I'm approaching it very much as I would as an illustrator, where we can pull out, I find that the bottom of the nose often curves like this, kind of a convex curve. Often the nose I like to bring up into a slight point. And the bridge of the nose right now actually looks pretty good. But this is yet another place where you can get a lot of variety in how people look just on the profile of their nose shape. But overall, I think this actually looks pretty good. As a side note, it kind of reveals that the ridge of my philtrum, I don't like that pointing out. If anything, that needs to be pointing inward, more convex than concave. So just quickly, I'm going to smooth that out, switch back to a more appropriate matte cap. Let's just inflate this, finalize our philtrum transition into the nose. That looks pretty good. Maybe the crease at the tip of the nose is a little too much. Columella is pretty smooth overall, good proportions. And then the last ridge that I mentioned, let's select our Draw Sharp brush. I'm going to hold Control and lightly push in this kind of shape where it comes out and then back in towards the tip of the nose. Also, maybe build up with my Clay Strips brush this ridge. And we'll smooth it out. Maybe that's a little too strong with the smooth. Hit the S key. So if I want to control the smooth brush and how strong it is, I'll hit S to switch to that brush, and then from here I can adjust the strength. It was only at 0.5, I guess let's go down to 0.3. And then once I establish that, I can be on any other brush, and when I hold Shift, it will assume those settings. Just because Smooth is a special brush that has its own, dedicated hotkey for holding down the Shift key. All right, so those ridges right there, that I find to be fairly common in nasal structure. And let's take a look from the front. How are we looking? Overall, pretty good. There is still a little bit of lumpiness, which from the front angle can reveal these inconsistencies in the surface. I'm going to take my inflate strength down to like 0.4. And I'm not going to waste time getting it perfect. I know that dynamic topology is not ideal for perfectly smooth surfaces. But overall, that looks pretty good. And now we can kind of look at this as an illustrator, and we can see the common contours that are drawn to represent the nose. If I turn on my overlays, let's switch to the annotation tool. I'm talking about this kind of thing, where it comes out and then down. Nostril, rim of the nostril. So it's looking pretty good. Turn off overlays. Look at this in perspective. Before we transition to the eye region, I might just cut the beginnings of the infraorbital rim here. It's sort of in between nose and eye, but I think it'll look nice to have that loosely defined. We'll talk about that more, but yeah, there we go. That just looks a little more finished, and I'm happy with that as a generic nose. And before we call this video completely done, I'm going to switch back over to my mouse, and we're going to add that grid cube for visually templating the shape of the nose that we've landed on. So we'll go back to object mode, turn on our overlays. Like this one we did for the mouth, let's add a cube. We'll change the viewport display as wire, also enable in front. And for the general scale, I want the front of the cube to touch the front of the nose, like this. The bottom to touch, the transition from nostril to philtrum. And then for the top right corner, let's see, go to wireframe, move that up. We want it to be at the center of the eye. Move the back side to touch the corner. All right, so we're touching the upper right corner to the front of the eye. And now we're going to cut some edge loops with Control R, 2 vertically and 3 horizontally. Let's go to the front. Also cut to this way, but I'm going to scale horizontally so that the edge of our box touches the outside corner of our nostrils. All right, so the point of this cube is for visual templating. And it's a very valuable technique for, number one, training your eye to translate source material onto whatever you're creating, as well as taking a potentially more complex whole and subdividing it into more digestible, smaller sections. So if we imagine this grid and I switch to the annotation tool and we number them, 1, 2, 3. This is great for zooming into a particular box, like box number 9, and noting where the contours of our alar crease cross the grid units. Also, we can focus that in grid 9, the alar crease comes up to about halfway vertically and then curves down to the bottom quarter of grid unit 8, right? And so if you just focus on the shapes within each square, that's very doable compared to looking at the whole nostril along with the entire shape of the nose. That can be a little overwhelming, a little more difficult. But starting out, this is a very good tool to simplify the visual translating process. And so for you watching this video, if you want to pause, let's turn off annotations in case you like to match your sculpture to exactly what you see in the video. And then for the front angle as well. Whenever you do this on your own, try to keep the grid units as square as possible, because if they're skewed vertically or horizontally, your translation might be skewed as well. So it's good to standardize this templating process with square grid units. And you don't need to use this all the time. It's good for training your eye, and eventually you won't need it at all. Your eye will just understand better how to translate source material and apply it into your sculpture or model or creation. And with that said, now we can call the nose finished. We're ready to move on into the eye.